Yeah, the whole quantity versus quality, because I think a lot of writers hear a lot of different opinions about that. And obviously there isn't a one size fits all, but I think sometimes that's something we get preoccupied by. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Well, everybody is going to have like the number of words that they are comfortable producing in a day. And everybody, see, that number is not necessarily your max. You can go further and still produce quality. So if you're comfortable producing 1,000 words a day, you could probably do 2,000 and still produce a quality thing. But after a while, you're gonna lose your focus and you're just gonna start throwing things down. And it is gonna be a variable number depending on how organized you are, whether you're a plotter or a pantser, that whole thing. And so you're gonna hit kind of a threshold where the quality of the story is going to start going down because you're no longer able to, you know, slow down and think the scene out.
Yeah.
It depends on how quick you are on the uptake. Um, can you roll with it? Can you like, oh yeah, okay, here's a change to the narrative, and this is good. This is coming naturally in the story, and can I keep going? And so for me, my comfort spot, and this is about 3,000 a day, 3,000 words, but I can go to 5,000 a day if I want to. My maximum, I produced like 11,500 words in a day one time. Yeah, it was like 2 days after Christmas, and I hadn't written in a couple of days, and I was really and I woke up like at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wrote until like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, I just was going, and and everybody was out. Brandy and William were somewhere else, and I just sat there in front of the keyboard all day long, just going. And yeah, so everybody can has their comfort, but they can go a little bit further. But quantity is good for the people that can do that. But that has to be the kind of person that can juggle all of those. Not everybody can juggle 5, 6 stories at once. I'm very good at compartmentalizing. I can stop thinking about book A and I can move on to book B, and then I can, while I'm working on book B in my head, like an idea for book C may come up, and so I start organizing. But I can do all of that, and so I can work on 10 projects at once if I want to. But some people have to be able to focus on that one project. And so in that case, quality for them is one project at a time. But I can produce quality 10 projects at a time. Generally I keep it to about 5 because I don't want to go too crazy with it. But yeah, I can produce quality stuff working 5 stories at once. But it's not for everybody. But I wouldn't ever do 20 at a time because that's too much. I wouldn't be able to maintain quality control on those 20 projects.
Would you go so far as to say, let's say I'm a writer who I just do one project at a time, that's my
Hmm.
comfort zone. Would you go so far as to say there's always a benefit to at least being able to work on multiple projects at once? Or
I
is that true or not?
Okay, so every writer has the same complaint. I'm working on my book and then I have an idea for a new book. So why not create a B project? So when you're writing the A project and then all of a sudden you're like, I can't, I've got a log jam. Well, that log jam is because project B is trying to get out. Why not start project B and start noodling on it? Write a chapter or write a scene or whatever and try to clear that out of your head. That's why I do multiple projects. It's because it makes it easier for me to write project A because I've got B, C, D, and E
Uh,
floating around.
and
And
that's a
then if
little
and
counterintuitive too.
Yeah, but if I run into a problem with project A, I move on to project B. I work on it. Sometimes I'll just work on project A for like 2 weeks and I won't even bother with the other ones because if I'm on a roll, why would I stop? And so then I'll hit a point where I'm like, oh, I'm getting tired of this, and then so I'll move on to something else and I'll try to keep it fresh.
And then if you really have that, then essentially the dreaded writer's block, which
I've never had writer's
You know,
block.
yeah, you never have to worry about that.
Nope, I never have it. And part of that probably is because I've got some messed up ADHD brain or whatever. I don't know. I've never been diagnosed, so I have no idea. But I mean, yeah, I bounce from project to project, but I mean, it works for me. But see, to me, I write the rough draft as fast as I can, and the real book comes together in the editing room. It doesn't really come together in the rough draft. I try to get it as close to what I want in the rough draft as I can,
Yeah.
because I can get very frustrated with something if it's garbage in the rough. I really can't. I have a difficult time getting excited about it when it comes time to edit it. So I try to get it as close as I can, but it really the true story and the polish really comes out in edits. So I mean, I don't even bother write it first to get it exactly right. As a matter of fact, two of my Johnny Hardwood books have been rewritten several times over because I like Johnny on the Spot. I wrote this 90,000 word novel, and that was part of the 11,000 word day, by the way. I finished the book, yeah. So I'm writing it, and then I'm like, this just isn't good. There's a story in here, but it's not here. So I throw it off to the side and I leave it for like 6 months. And then I came back to it and I'm like, oh, that's what I needed to do. And so I go back, and now, I'm only probably going to use about 40,000 words of that book, but that comprises the first half of my novel. And then the other half will be the rest of this mystery that I was trying to tell, but I never seemed to get to it. So, you know, you, the rough draft is just exactly that. It's just a pile of junk, and you have to eventually assemble it. It's like getting something from IKEA, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, except you don't have any kind of instructions on how to put it together. You have to kind of figure it all out on your own, and then you're just sitting there with like a bunch of bricks and screws and nuts and bolts and all that, and you got to figure out how to make a coffee table out of it. And so that's when edits come in.
You might have 5 extra legs for the coffee table by the time you're done. You got to throw those extra legs out instead of trying to somehow stuff them into the furniture.
So every one of my books, any long-term project, anything I feel like is going to be a novel or a novella, I create what's called a dump file. And when I'm editing, and sometimes I'll edit in the middle of writing the rough. I'll go in and I'll kind of polish a little bit, and because I like to go back and read what I've already written so that I can stay, because I use a lot of different styles too, and I like to be able to stay in the style throughout the story. And so what I'll do is I'll like things that don't fit. If I don't like it, I'm like, I'll take it, and rather than delete it, I'll cut it and I'll stick it in the dump file. So that way, when I go back and edit, I look in my dump file whenever if I'm feeling like there's something missing or I've got a continuity issue or something like that. I go back through my dump file and I see if I can fix it with something that's in there. But I have yeah, I've got one for the entire Johnny Hardwood series, and the dump file it went over 50,000 words not too long ago. So I've got a book's worth of deleted material. But see, these things are things I can put into stories later on too. Just because they didn't fit with this story doesn't mean it won't fit with another one.
Kind of
So
just
that
a quick logistical question about that dump file. So
Mhm.
like when you throw something out of your manuscript and put it in that dump file, how do you indicate like where you took it from, or do you just say like do you
Oh,
know
I don't use any context. I cut it and I throw it in there, and then I do a double space to let you know. So I put like four, because it's gonna be double spaced anyway, because I'm old school. I do double spacing on my thing, because I will print stuff out and mark it up too. So everything's double spaced. So I'll do like a 4 space thing in between and that's how the scene is over with. The portion that got cut. Yeah. So I probably should organize it a little bit better, but I like that controlled chaos of the dump file.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
It's kind of a better, because it's better than my method in a sense, in that I just save every version. Like, so I've got, I'm one of those people that's like, version 5024, of the manuscript. Here it is.
Oh yeah.
And so I can always technically, in theory, get to any of my previous stuff, but sometimes remembering, oh, okay, when did I make that change in the story? Oh, well,
Right.
that becomes a problem.
You run into that sort of problem because sometimes you inadvertently cut something important to the story. You know,
Yes.
yeah, and then you would have to refer back to a previous version. I just I try to build the story chapter by chapter. I treat each chapter as a short story, and so I think, okay, is this a good story in and of itself? And then if it is, then I move on, and then and I'm trying to build the connective tissue between the chapters as I go,
Yeah.
and to try to make it less choppy, because
And
my son jokes that I write choppy books.
oh,
So but yeah, so I try to make it less choppy by adding the connective tissue.
and Vela makes it more that way and you were talking about treating each chapter as like its own mini story. And I
Hmm.
mean, Vela just accentuates that approach too.
The beauty of Vela is and we don't think about it, but we can go back and change chapters.
Yes.
We can go back and completely rewrite anything we want to. And so if I'm not all that concerned about continuity mistakes as much. I still try to make it as perfect as I can. This is about being professional. People are paying money for this. I'm
Right.
going to give them something worthy of them paying money for. But if I see a small mistake somewhere, I don't freak out about it. And what I'll do is when it's complete, I'll very quietly go back and I'll make the changes I want to make. And then I'll resubmit everything. And then
Right.
I'll hit the complete button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like, yeah, it's like you said, don't freak out about it. And also
Right.
it's not like, oh, it's just a minor mistake, but the original draft was the pure artist's form of the draft, so I can't make any changes. Like there's none of that. Like,
Oh yeah.
I'm never above fixing an error, no matter how small it is.
I agree. I think that sort of stuff, that's just a cop out. I just immediately picture like the most stereotypical writer that they always portray in the books, always drinking some kind of bourbon or whatever and sitting, and using like a manual typewriter to write his books. And even though, we're in the age of laptops and tablets and everything, and he's got like the wall of books behind him that he's probably never read. Yeah, I hate that
Yeah,
guy so
yeah,
much. I really hate that guy. So,
yeah.
you know,
It's one of
he
those
definitely doesn't worship Bychok. That's for sure.
no, he does not. And it's one of those stereotypes that, like, I don't know, like some of these stereotypes we've been living with, I feel, for so long, and it's like I think some of these stereotypes are ready to die and be replaced by newer, more accurate stereotypes. And I think a lot of the author stereotypes may fall under that category, you know.
And
But
also now we need to remember we are pulp writers
Yeah.
and they weren't obsessing over every little thing because they had to pay the bills.
Right.
Yeah, okay, it's a good, fast moving story, great, send it in, yay.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we have to
Really,
remember,
Gail, you ought to be like Johnny Appleseed and just going around America delivering copies of the Pulp Jungle to people.
yeah,
'Cause that book is amazing.
isn't it? Isn't it?
Man, that was amazing. Because
I know.
that's what he was talking about. I'm like, remember when he would talk later in the book when he's talking about how you have to be able to sit down and crank out like a story a day,
Yes, yes.
and that's how you made your money.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was a wonderful book.
Exactly. And we need to trust our subconscious that it's back there working
Right.
24/7, giving us these ideas, giving us these directions. And too many writers don't trust that. They get writer's block and then they quit. That's it. They walk away.
they sort of embrace that. They let that inner editor suffocate
Yes.
them to death, don't they?
Yes.
Right. Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so many editors will tell you the same thing. Don't do my job for me.
Yes.
You write the story, clean it up. Don't send
Yeah.
me some
Yeah.
flawed, piece of junk, but send me something I can work with. But it's funny, Gail, because you're talking about the um oh gosh, what you were just saying it. Now my brain. Okay, so you were, the idea that um oh hell, I don't know.
What, that our subconscious is back in the.
Yes. Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. We have to, okay, so we have to trust. This is
Yes.
where you have to learn to trust yourself. You have to learn to
Yes.
trust your whole brain.
Yes.
And your subconscious is going to be working for your benefit in a case like that. And
Yeah.
you have to be willing to trust the fact that, that you've got a whole crew of brain cells working for you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Huh?
Because I've gone back to things that I thought was absolute trash, and I open up the file like 4 or 5 years later, just thinking, oh, because I'm thinking, I'm going to delete this. It's not that. And then I open it up and I'm like, holy crap, this is good. Who wrote this?
I
Yeah,
did.
me too. That happens all the time when I find older stuff.
Yeah,
I think
because
this is not as crappy as I was afraid it was.
and you find, and it's like another person wrote it, because it's 4 or 5 years later, and you're a completely different person by then in a lot of ways.
For
You know,
completely different writers,
a
certainly.
completely different writer for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I found something I wrote about 10 years ago, and I'm like, well, I can't finish this because I am so not that person anymore, but I can adapt it as if I'm reading somebody else's book, and I can adapt this material to my new
Yes.
way of
Yes.
writing and thinking.
I had to do something similar to that. I pulled up a story I'd written like 10 years ago, and I had to take the story in a totally new direction in order to finish it
Sure.
because I knew the original story arc. I'm like, I just can't write that story anymore. That's
Yeah.
not the type of
Right.
writer I am. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's interesting how that changes. And I don't know, as far as writers go, they're some of my favorite writers. You can see the trajectory of how their writing style changed and evolved over time. I know that
Yes.
that's not true of all commercial writers or super popular writers. I mean, Stephen King, I don't know, maybe I haven't read enough Stephen King, his recent stuff versus his old stuff, but um, I don't know.
I would say with Stephen King, the greatest example is, it's not his best book, but Dreamcatchers,
Yes.
because that was the book
What
written after he got
everything is.
hit by the van.
Hmm.
And that book is just it's a litany of pain, and and he was going through, like, his leg was all busted up, it had pins in it and all of that. I mean, you can see in his life how certain things, you know um, influence him. Oh, The Shining is another example.
Yes.
That's a kind of a meditation on fatherhood in a lot of ways, and he was addicted to I think cocaine at the time.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
But watching a
Any,
writer change, I saw it most clearly in Jim Butcher in the Dresden Files. From book 1 to say book 5, you could
Yeah.
watch him getting better.
interesting.
That's a good one. Well, another great example is Heinlein, Gail.
Oh,
There's the
yes.
there's the pre-accident,
Yep.
remember? And then
Yep.
there's post-accident, and
Yep.
people will think that he like had suffered some kind of brain damage or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's when he starts writing like Stranger in a Strange Land and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. Yeah. What was it? Was it a motorcycle accident or a car wreck
I
or
think it
something?
was a motorcycle accident. Yeah, but yeah, and he did his I don't know what exactly it was, but his desire to, okay, I'm not a pulp writer anymore. I'm going to write more serious stuff. And it
Right.
just burgeoned after that. Like, I guess, how much time do I have? These are things I want to get down. Yes, these are things I want to write. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
getting back to pulp writers for a minute. So, Gail, why do you think that the pulp writers kind of, because we're talking about stereotypes about writers, and pretty much all the stereotypes we know about writers or that predominate right now are
Mhm.
kind of from writers from the late 20th century. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
why why haven't any of those stereotypical elements of the writer, why didn't those survive from, say, the pulp era, do you think?
I don't know if it's generational or what, but now, so the opinion is that the pulp writers were just crap, pouring
Yeah.
out stuff, and sure, a lot of them were. But if you look at the writers who came from that, uh, we're not talking crap. We're not Dashiell Hammett, for example, Raymond Chandler. Oh, Louis L'Amour, for example, all
Yeah.
the, and pretty much any science fiction writer of that time period had
Hmm.
to start out in the pulps. And yeah, and they used that to learn their craft and
Right.
got better.
And they were all trying to graduate to the slicks.
Yes, yes, that was the
You
goal
know,
for
that was
most.
always the goal. The goal was never, and it's like Gruber says in the Pulp Jungle, the life of a pulp writer is X number of years, and then you got to try to make the jump.
Yep, yep, exactly.
And that's what he was doing, and that's why he was exploring all those different angles, working in Hollywood, and and then trying to get into um, the book market and all of that. Yeah, I mean, they were always trying to move toward success, but I mean, a lot of times they would get stuck because you learn how to sell to a market,
Right.
and then that becomes, you become an expert at that, and I mean, all of a sudden that's pretty regular money.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
hard to
that
get out of that slot. Yeah.
and it's something we have to worry about doing Vela, because we're going to get used to the idea of writing serialized fiction, and we've got to be prepared to take those serials and adapt them to the novel format, because we can't rely on the idea that reading tastes are going to evolve entirely towards serialized fiction. So we've got to get used to the idea of taking these shorter chapters and turning them into long chapters, and that thing that appears on Vela is not necessarily going to be the thing that appears in print.
So our version of going for the slicks, getting
Yeah,
out of the pulp and going for the slicks. Yes,
exactly,
absolutely.
exactly.
Even Lester Dent, who wrote most of the Doc Savage novels, I found one of his mysteries in a,
He was
you know,
great.
yeah, he had
Yeah,
awesome stuff, and he
yeah.
translated into books and other things, and
But
he did.
he wasn't as good, or he wasn't as popular, I don't think, without
Yes,
doing
exactly,
Doc Savage. Yeah,
exactly. Uh-huh.
yeah. But I think that was probably um, a perception thing. People were like, "Oh, that he's a pulp writer. He's not going to be," because his name was pretty well known.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and again, he was writing under the house name
all
for
right.
Street Smith too,
Yeah,
so he
but people in the
yeah,
industry knew it, and so yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I was I was gonna reach up here and grab my collected letters of John Steinbeck,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna paraphrase. So there's a period in Steinbeck's career that the Elbow Patch Brigade will not talk about. And that period is where Steinbeck very arrogantly said, "You know what? There's a lot of money in like mystery and science fiction. I'm gonna, and that's all garbage literature. I'm gonna just dash some of that off and make a little bit of money, and then I can go back to doing the real work, the artistic work, you know."
Yeah.
And he crashed and burned as a genre writer, and that's something they do not like to talk about because they act like genre is alchemically inferior. It's like
Yes.
somebody took their philosopher's stone and took like East of Eden and like rubbed their philosopher's stone on it, and it became art instead of just popular hack work. But that same guy was trying to turn out horror stories like Edgar Allan Poe type stuff, and
Yeah.
and he was trying to turn out like some science fiction and everything, and he absolutely failed at it. And he's writing to people in these collected letters talking about how this stuff is a lot harder than I thought it would be, especially the mystery.
I think
And
Upton Sinclair actually edited one of the pulp magazines, was
he
an
did.
editor of one of the pulp magazines,
Yeah.
and he's fairly well known.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to read his stuff in school. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there's no difference. I've written mainstream literary stuff. I've written genre. The only difference is, if I have to be truthful about it, literary constricts my creativity,
Yes.
because I'm it's got to be a story here, right? I can't throw anything magical into it and go into a different direction. It's very limited to this, the world around us. And that's part of why I like reading is I don't have to deal with the outside world. So why would I want to, why would I want to read that? You know? Why would I want to write it? I do occasionally though.
Well, and there are little ways to try to get around it. Like one of my favorite authors is Marquez, and he used to love writing a lot of magical realism.
Hmm.
So, it's still literary, but there's still that nice otherworldly sort of magical aspect.
Oh yeah, yeah. The thing is, nowadays I saw somebody um, get attacked saying, well, that's the literature of South America, and as a North American writer, you can't do that. And I'm like, my gosh, man, really? Magical realism was a big deal back in the mid '90s.
Oh
It
yeah.
was a big deal, and a lot of magazines were publishing um, magical realism for the longest time. The funny thing was nobody could define it. Magical realism looked a lot like contemporary fantasy, or
Let me
urban
ask,
fantasy.
on that note, I need to ask you guys a question because one of my current villas, I've decided to incorporate some magical realism into it.
Hmm.
And I have decided, because it is so elusive to define, and because quite frankly, I don't know that most readers know what it even means. So when it comes to the tags for my story or the summary or any of that, I don't mention that it's magical realism at all. Do you think I'm making the right choice there, or should I label that magical realism because that's technically what I think I'm doing? But, does that just muddy the waters, or does that serve a purpose or not?
Gail, you want to go or do you want me to?
No idea. So you go.
Okay, so we're going to start with the cynical answer. And the cynical answer is 99% of the people on Vela are not going to know what the fuck magical realism is. Not going to know what magical realism is. Uh-oh, a Lewis moment. Okay,
That was
so
the first thought. Yes.
yeah, that's pretty good. We've gone several videos and I haven't cursed yet. Okay,
Amazing.
so yeah, they're not going to know. They're not gonna like the people that because again, it's like Gail has said and done such a great job of hammering into us. We're pulp writers, and so you're not going to see a lot of the MFA and creative writing people showing up on Vela.
Yeah.
There's gonna be some. Don't get me wrong, but they're not going to be showing up in the droves like you would think.
Right.
So they're not going to know what the hell magical realism is. And so I wouldn't even put it as a tag. At this point, you've got 7 tags. You need to use them effectively and get into categories, you know. And now, if y'all wanted to, we could all write magical realism and try to create a tag for it, and maybe try to generate interest in it and help educate. But I like as a solo artist, I wouldn't do that. I would try to um, right within one of the other tags that's already fairly popular. That way people are finding you. Because nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to care.
And there's
And
sort of like,
really, John, it sounds like you want to impress somebody. Who do you
I
want
know,
to
that's why I
That's
decided, I
what
was
I
like,
thought.
why am I including this? Like, why
Yeah,
would I felt forced. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to throw that in there.
there you go.
Well, I
Honesty is
guess my instincts
overrated.
were
Come
right.
on.
Yeah, you're right. See, I knew you guys would steer me well. So
Well, it's the no BS zone. We have the you
that's
have
what I like
you have
about,
the benefit of 2 people that just are like allergic to
Yes.
bullshit.
to BS.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like that's part of the pulp writer mentality, which I love that we all share, because we don't get caught up with things like the appearances of things and what's the proper term. Like, it's sort of like coming up with tags for your stories. I think, the MFA writer would say, now what are the proper tags for my story? And I
Right.
think we ask ourselves, what are readers going to search for? And
Yes.
that and what's technically proper or accurate are not going to
Yeah.
be the same.
You
So
have hit it right on the head.
Yes.
You have answered it perfectly. I'm just going to say that it's, and that is because the MFA is going to approach it as an artist, and we're approaching it as business people,
Yes.
because the marketing part has to be done with the business brain. I started off with how can I define my masterpiece? And you get that pretentious look on your face, right? And then the glass of Chivas Regal like just kind of grows up out of the wood on the table, and you're like, oh yes, and I remember this interesting story about Winston Churchill, and just all the BS that goes with like being that stereotypical writer. And the artist has no place in the marketing part. You have to turn that part off, and you have to think, what are the tags that people are clicking on? What are they reading? How do I get my foot in the door? And that's what we've got to do now. But that's not to say that we can't have movements on you know on Vela, because that's going to be the big thing. The big thing is going to be, is there going to be a movement come out of Vela and add some of that kind of artistic legitimacy to the app? And magical realism, for an example, could be that. If a bunch of people are putting that on there, and then all of a sudden it shows up on the carousel of popular tags, because that's what you want. You want to be on the popular tag thing so that people can find you. Because that was how the Corpse's Confession got so many reads, was because it was in the top 20 in mystery, and it was on the recently completed carousel, and it was showing up in front of people who are not just Vela writers themselves. It's like the casual readers coming on. They saw it, they clicked on it, they read it. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for that organic readership.
Yeah.
And you can't do that if you just make up your own tags.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good discussion as always.